Allen Iverson made over $200 million during his basketball career. By 2012, he couldn't pay a $900,000 debt to his jeweler. On the surface, this looks like every other cautionary tale about athletes and money. Gambling, partying, bad investments. The usual story about someone who had it all and threw it away. But I've been digging into the court documents, the financial records, the timeline of what actually happened. And what's underneath is far more complex than the headlines suggest. This isn't a story about stupidity. It's a story about loyalty, about a promise made in the projects of Hampton, Virginia, that followed Allen Iverson to every city, every contract, every dollar he ever earned, and in America. Loyalty without boundaries will destroy you. The answer had no answer for the one question that mattered. How do you say no to the people who believed in you first? This is the dark reality of Allen Iverson's financial collapse. Allen Iverson grew up in Hampton, Virginia, in the kind of poverty that doesn't just shape you, it defines every decision you'll ever make. His mother, Ann Iverson, was 15 years old when she had him, single, no father in the picture. They lived in public housing, moved constantly, survived on whatever they could piece together. Hampton in the 1980s and 90s wasn't just poor, it was forgotten. The kind of place where the rest of America didn't look unless something went wrong. But here's what poverty does when you're a kid. It teaches you who your people are. Allen's crew wasn't just friends, they were survival. The kids from the neighborhood who had nothing, same as him. They looked out for each other because no one else would. Shared meals when there was food, shared clothes, shared dreams that felt impossible from where they stood. Us versus the world wasn't a mentality they chose. It was reality. And Allen Iverson was special. Everyone in Hampton could see it. The way he moved on a basketball court. On a football field, it didn't matter what sport. He was fast, fearless, electric. By high school, he was a legend, not just in Hampton, statewide, national attention. This kid from the projects who might actually make it out, that might, became a lot more complicated in February 1993. Allen Iverson was 17 years old when he walked into that bowling alley. The details of what happened that night at Circle Lanes are still disputed. What's confirmed? A brawl broke out between black teenagers and white patrons. Chairs thrown, people injured. Police arrived. And when the arrests came, Allen Iverson's name was at the top of the list. He was charged with maiming by mob, a charge that carries serious weight in Virginia. The trial became a media spectacle. Racial tensions were already high in Hampton. This case poured gasoline on everything. Allen maintained his innocence. Witnesses were unreliable. Video footage was grainy, inconclusive, but the jury convicted him anyway. 15 years in prison for a 17-year-old kid whose only real crime, in the eyes of many in Hampton, was being talented and black in the wrong place at the wrong time. He served 4 months before Virginia's governor granted conditional clemency. 4 months that could have ended everything. But here's what happened instead. Hampton rallied. His community didn't abandon him. They showed up to court. They wrote letters. They protested. When the world saw a criminal, Hampton saw their son. When the media wrote him off, Hampton doubled down. That loyalty, that belief from Hampton. When the world turned its back, Allen Iverson would spend the rest of his life trying to repay it, every single dollar of it. Georgetown University head coach John Thompson made Allen Iverson a deal. Thompson was one of the most respected figures in college basketball, a black coach who used his platform to fight for his players, to protect them from a system that wanted to exploit their talent and discard them. when he offered Allen a scholarship with conditions: stay out of trouble, focus on school, prove the doubters wrong. It wasn't just about basketball. It was a lifeline. Allen took it. He moved to Washington, D.C., enrolled at Georgetown, and became a Hoya. But Georgetown wasn't a fresh start where he left Hampton behind. It became an extension of that same loyalty structure. The crew came with him, not physically at first, but in spirit, in phone calls, in promises. "When I make it to the NBA," Allen would say, "we all make it." And everyone believed him. At Georgetown, Allen Iverson was sensational. Small for a basketball player at 6 feet tall, but impossibly quick. Crossover dribble that broke ankles. Fearless driving to the basket against players half a foot taller. He carried Georgetown to the NCAA tournament, became a national star. By 1996, leaving early for the NBA draft wasn't a question. It was inevitable. The Philadelphia 76ers selected him first overall. Number 1 pick. The top of the mountain. Allen Iverson. The kid from Hampton who served time at 17 was about to sign a contract worth millions of dollars. The promise he made, "we all make it," was about to be tested. Because Allen Iverson was about to become rich beyond imagination. But the promise he made in Hampton. That promise had no salary cap, no luxury tax, no fiscal responsibility clause. It was absolute, and it would follow him everywhere. Allen Iverson didn't just enter the NBA in 1996. He detonated it. Rookie season with the Philadelphia 76ers, 23.5 points per game. Rookie of the Year. But the numbers don't capture what he actually did to basketball culture. The cornrows, the tattoos covering his arms, the arm sleeve that became iconic, the hip-hop persona that the NBA had spent decades trying to sanitize out of its image. David Stern's NBA wanted clean-cut professionals in suits. Allen Iverson showed up as himself, and an entire generation responded, on the court. He was electric in ways that transcended statistics. 6 feet tall in a league of giants, but he played like he was 7 feet. Crossed over Michael Jordan in his rookie year, the moment that announced he wasn't just another player. He was a cultural shift. The money followed immediately. His rookie contract. 3 years, $9 million. By 1999, the extension came 6 years, $70.9 million. Then, in 2003, 4 years, $76.7 million. Add in the veteran contracts, the final years, the international stints. By the time Allen Iverson retired in 2010, his NBA salary alone totaled approximately $154 million. But that number doesn't include the real money. In 2001, Reebok signed Allen Iverson to a deal that would define his financial future in ways no one understood at the time. The headline number. A lifetime endorsement contract worth roughly $50 million over 10 years. Then, $800,000 annually for life after that. Allen Iverson would never have to worry about money again. Reebok was betting that his cultural impact would last forever. They were right about that part. What the media didn't focus on, what wouldn't matter until much later, was a clause buried in the contract. A trust fund. $32 million. Set aside. Untouchable until Allen Iverson turned 55 in 2030. Reebok's lawyers built in protections, safeguards specifically designed to ensure that no matter what happened, Allen would have money when he was older. At the time, it probably seemed unnecessary, overly cautious. Allen was making millions per year. Why would he need a trust fund? But Reebok's lawyers knew something that Allen's circle either didn't know or didn't want to acknowledge. Athletes, especially athletes from poverty, almost always go broke. The statistics are brutal. Within 5 years of retirement, an estimated 60% of NBA players are broke or in serious financial distress. Reebok was protecting their investment. They were also, though no one knew it yet, protecting Allen Iverson from himself. This detail, this trust fund, would become the most important financial decision of Allen Iverson's life. Not because he made it, but because Reebok's lawyers made it for him. Add in the other endorsements. Reebok was the big one, but there were others. Trading cards, video games, appearances, licensing deals. Allen Iverson's face sold, his brand sold. Conservative estimates put his total career earnings, NBA salary, endorsements, all of it at over $200 million. $200 million. For a kid who grew up in Hampton projects, who wore hand-me-down clothes, who sometimes didn't know where the next meal was coming from. This wasn't just money. This was generational wealth. This was, nobody in my family ever has to struggle again, money. And Allen Iverson kept his promise. The entourage started small. 10 people, maybe. Childhood friends from Hampton, family members, people who had been there from the beginning. But here's how it works when you suddenly have $200 million and everyone you love has nothing. You buy your mother a house. Of course you do. Then your grandmother needs a place. Your cousins need help with rent. Your best friend from elementary school needs a car to get to work. Someone's going through a medical emergency and doesn't have insurance. Someone's baby needs diapers. Someone's electric is about to get shut off. And you say yes. Every time. Because these are your people. Because they were there when you had nothing. Because in Hampton, you learned that you survive together or you don't survive at all. The 10 people became 20, then 30, then 50. By the mid-2000s, Allen Iverson was supporting somewhere between 50 and 75 people at any given time. Not all of them lived with him. That's a misconception. But monthly allowances, travel expenses when they wanted to visit, housing costs, medical bills, legal fees when someone got in trouble, car payments, education expenses for their kids. When you're supporting 75 people, every dollar multiplies. Allen's personal barber from Hampton traveled with him everywhere, to every city, every game. That meant flights, hotels, per diem. The cost wasn't just the haircut, $5,000 per month. According to court documents that would surface later, the cost was the entire infrastructure of loyalty. And Allen never questioned it. This wasn't him being foolish. This was him being exactly who Hampton taught him to be. The expenses mounted in ways that would seem incomprehensible to most people. Court documents filed years later in Georgia would reveal the specifics. Monthly expenses that seemed impossible: $10,000 for clothing, $10,000 for restaurants, $10,000 for groceries, $3,000 for dry cleaning, up to $5,000 per month for haircuts. Total monthly burn rate, $360,000. That's $4.3 million per year, just on living expenses. But here's the thing people miss when they hear those numbers. This wasn't just Allen Iverson living large. This was Allen Iverson keeping a promise to 75 people. This was survival economics, from Hampton scaled up to NBA money. The math still didn't work, but the math was never the point. Allen also invested, tried to build businesses that would outlast basketball. He started a record label, Crew Jiggy Records, to give his friends careers in music, poured money into production, studio time, marketing. The label never produced a commercially successful track. He invested in other ventures, real estate deals that fell through, business partners who promised returns that never materialized. Some of it was bad luck. Some of it was bad advice. Some of it was people seeing an opportunity to take advantage of someone who didn't know how to say no. But here's what nobody understood about that Reebok deal. Hidden in the fine print was a clause that would save Allen Iverson's life. The question was whether he'd survive long enough to reach it. May 7th, 2002. Allen Iverson sat in front of a wall of microphones, visibly frustrated, and delivered what would become one of the most infamous press conferences in sports history. We're talking about practice, not a game, not a game, not a game. We're talking about practice. The clip went viral before viral was really a thing. ESPN played it on loop. Sports radio tore into him for days. The narrative crystallized instantly. Allen Iverson was lazy, entitled, didn't respect the game. Here was proof that all the concerns about his attitude, his refusal to conform, his resistance to authority here was the evidence everyone needed. But here's what they didn't report. 3 months earlier, Allen's best friend since childhood, Rahsaan Langford, had been shot and killed in their hometown. The friend everyone called Ra, one of the core members of that Hampton crew, dead at 28 years old. Allen was playing through the grief. He was also playing through injuries, a broken thumb that season, bone bruises, the kind of physical damage that accumulates when you're 6 feet tall, throwing your body at players half a foot taller every single night. And he was supporting 50+ people financially while dealing with all of it. The practice rant wasn't about basketball. It was exhaustion. It was grief pouring out in the only moment he couldn't control it anymore. The media had been questioning his commitment to practice while his head coach had just been fired, while his friend was dead, while he was trying to hold everything together for everyone depending on him. "We're talking about practice" became a punchline, but it was actually a breaking point, and it showed something important. The world didn't understand what Allen Iverson was carrying. They saw the celebrity, the highlight reels, the commercial deals. They didn't see the weight. That misunderstanding would define how his financial collapse was covered a decade later. Around the same time, the practice rant was becoming a meme. Another narrative started circulating. Allen Iverson was losing millions in Atlantic City. The whispers started in gossip columns, then moved to sports blogs, then eventually to mainstream outlets. Stories about Allen hitting the casinos after games, high-stakes gambling, losses that supposedly ran into 7 figures. Some reports claimed $10 million. Others said more. The Atlantic City story became part of the Allen Iverson mythology. When people later asked, how did he go broke? The answer seemed obvious: gambling. But here's where we need to separate fact from rumor, because this matters. This is where the lazy narrative takes over and the truth gets buried. ESPN investigated. Multiple outlets requested financial records. And when Allen Iverson's finances finally became public through court documents in 2012, reporters went looking for the gambling losses everyone knew had happened. Court documents show debts, multiple 6-figure debts to various creditors by the late 2000s. Financial strain is absolutely evident. The pattern of overspending is undeniable. What the documents never specified: gambling. The debts were to jewelers, to business partners, to creditors from failed investments, not to casinos, not to bookies, not to Atlantic City establishments. Did Allen Iverson gamble? Almost certainly. There are enough witness accounts, enough photos of him at casinos, enough circumstantial evidence to say yes. He gambled. Did he lose millions specifically in Atlantic City? The verified evidence doesn't support that narrative. Multiple outlets reported the gambling losses as fact. but when pressed for sources, the trail goes cold. According to reports, citing other reports, citing anonymous sources, the game of telephone that turns rumor into accepted history. Here's the critical distinction: Allen Iverson didn't need to lose millions gambling to end up broke. The court documented $360,000 per month in expenses was already unsustainable. At that burn rate, even $200 million doesn't last forever. The math doesn't need a casino to destroy you. But the gambling narrative was easier. It fit the pattern people expected. It explained everything without requiring anyone to examine the system that created the problem. So that's the story that stuck. By 2006, people around Allen were starting to worry. Not publicly. Publicly, everything looked fine. He was still making all-star teams, still one of the highest-paid players in the league, still Allen Iverson. But privately, the people who actually looked at the numbers were sounding alarms. According to multiple reports, financial advisors attempted interventions. Friends who understood money tried to sit him down. The message was always the same. You need to cut people off. You can't support 75 people. The monthly expenses are unsustainable. Allen's response, by all accounts, was consistent. These people were there when I had nothing. It wasn't defiance. It was loyalty. The same loyalty that Hampton taught him. The same loyalty that kept him going when he was 17 and facing 15 years in prison. The same loyalty that was now, quietly, becoming a trap. Here's the psychology of it. When you grow up in poverty, when you make it out while everyone you love is still there, survivor's guilt isn't abstract. It's suffocating. Every dollar you spend on yourself feels like a betrayal. Every no feels like abandoning your people. And Allen Iverson couldn't say no. His jeweler, Aiden Ogun, would later tell reporters, "He had the biggest heart of anyone I ever met, but in this business, that will kill you." That quote, in 4 words, "that will kill you," proved prophetic. The interventions didn't work. The expenses didn't decrease. And the entourage didn't shrink. What did change Allen's contracts started getting smaller. By 2008, he was 33 years old, still talented, but aging in a league that moves fast. Philadelphia traded him. Denver traded him. Detroit signed him. Then let him go. The $20 million per year contracts were over. The offers that came were veteran minimum deals, prove-it contracts. His earning power was declining rapidly. But his expenses, still $360,000 per month. The math was becoming impossible, and everyone around him had an incentive to keep the machine running. Monthly allowances meant they needed Allen to keep earning. Business managers got paid percentages. Advisors took fees. Nobody had an incentive to tell him the truth he needed to hear. The money was running out. By 2010, Allen Iverson played his last NBA game. A brief stint in Turkey followed, but it didn't last. His basketball career, the engine that powered everything, was over, and the financial freefall was about to begin. February 2010. Allen Iverson played his final game in the NBA. It wasn't supposed to end like this. No farewell tour, no ceremony, no final speech at center court, just a quiet release from the Philadelphia 76ers, the team that drafted him first overall 14 years earlier. He tried Turkey. Besiktas offered him $4 million for 2 years, but the cultural adjustment was hard. The travel was grueling. He was 35 years old, his body breaking down after 15 years of throwing himself at players bigger than him. After 1 season, he came home. The basketball career that generated everything, the income, the identity, The platform that allowed him to keep his promise to Hampton was over. The NBA salary gone. But the monthly expenses, still $360,000. The entourage of 50 to 75 people didn't shrink just because the paychecks stopped. They still needed their allowances, still needed housing, still needed support. And Allen still couldn't say no. Reebok was still paying him roughly $800,000 per year from the lifetime deal. Sounds like a lot. It is a lot for most people. But $800,000 per year is $66,000 per month. He was spending $360,000 per month. The math was now undeniably, catastrophically broken. The money that took 14 years to earn was evaporating in months. In 2012, Aydin Ogun had a problem. Ogun owned Aydin & Co., a jewelry company in Georgia that had done business with Allen Iverson for years. Custom pieces, diamond chains, watches, the kind of jewelry that becomes part of an athlete's image. Allen owed him money, a lot of it, according to court documents filed in Fulton County, Georgia. The debt was $860,000. Ogun tried to work it out privately, attempted payment plans, gave extensions, but the payments stopped coming. So he did what creditors do when they've exhausted options. He filed a lawsuit, and when that lawsuit became public, everything changed. The media descended immediately. Allen Iverson broke. I can't pay jeweler. The headlines wrote themselves. Sports blogs ran countdowns of his career earnings next to the debt amount. $200 million earned. Can't pay $860,000. The narrative crystallized instantly. This was the cautionary tale. The athlete who made a fortune and threw it away. Gambling, partying, poor decisions. Everything everyone always suspected about Allen Iverson. Now confirmed. But the court documents told a more complicated story. The lawsuit forced Allen's financial records into the public domain, and what emerged wasn't just one unpaid debt. It was a complete financial portrait of unsustainable excess. Monthly expenses. Itemized. $10,000 for clothing. $10,000 for restaurants and dining. $10,000 for groceries. $3,000 for dry cleaning. Up to $5,000 per month for haircuts because his barber from Hampton traveled with him to every city. Utilities, multiple properties, car payments for multiple vehicles, insurance premiums, travel expenses for the entourage. Total, more than $360,000 per month. That's $4.3 million per year, just to maintain the lifestyle. Just to keep supporting everyone. And this is where the numbers become suffocating even if Allen had invested perfectly, even if he'd made smart business decisions, even if he'd never gambled a single dollar. $4.3 million per year in expenses means $200 million is gone in less than 50 years. But he wasn't 50 years old. He retired at 35, and the expenses had been at that level for years. Maybe a decade. The math had been impossible for a long time. The jeweler lawsuit just made it public. The media coverage was brutal. And here's where that practice rant from 2002 came back. The narrative that Allen Iverson was lazy, entitled, didn't respect money, didn't work hard, it all merged with this moment. Sports commentators who'd built careers criticizing him had their "I told you so" moment. But they missed the story. Allen Iverson's financial collapse wasn't just his fault. It was a systems failure at multiple levels. Failure number 1. The NBA in the early 2000s, when Allen entered the league. The NBA had no mandatory financial education for rookies. Players went from college poverty to multi-million-dollar contracts overnight with zero preparation. No classes on taxes, no guidance on investment, no warnings about the statistics that 60% of them would be broke within 5 years of retirement. The league benefited from players' spending. Every dollar an athlete spent on cars, jewelry, clothes, clubs, it fed the image, sold the brand. The NBA's entire marketing engine ran on the lifestyle. But when the money ran out, that was the player's problem. The NBA has improved since then. Mandatory financial literacy programs exist now. But for Allen's generation, they were learning by destroying their lives. Failure. Number 2. The advisors. Where were Allen's financial managers when the monthly expenses hit $360,000? Where were the accountants showing him projections? Where was anyone doing the basic math that should have triggered alarms years before the collapse? Court documents show Allen had financial advisors. He wasn't managing everything himself, so why wasn't anyone stopping this? The answer is uncomfortable. Everyone around him was getting paid. The managers took percentages, the advisors took fees, the entourage took allowances. Everyone had an incentive to keep the machine running. Nobody had an incentive to tell him the truth that might shut it down. This is unsustainable. The money will run out. It's easier to take your fee and let someone else be the bad guy. Failure number 3. The entourage. This is the most painful one to examine, because these weren't strangers. These were childhood friends, family members, people Allen loved, people who loved him back. But love and enabling often look identical until it's too late. The people Allen was supporting had to know, on some level, that $360,000 per month couldn't last forever. They had to see the career winding down. They had to understand that retirement meant the income stopped. But when someone's paying your rent, your car note, your children's expenses, confronting them about their own finances feels like biting the hand that feeds you. So you don't say anything. You keep accepting. You tell yourself it's fine because they're rich. They can afford it. It's not your responsibility to manage their money. And then, one day, the money stops, and you're gone. Because when Allen's finances collapsed, court documents and interviews suggest many of those 50 to 75 people simply disappeared. The monthly allowances stopped, and so did the loyalty. The friends he supported didn't protect him. They consumed him. June 2013. Allen's wife, Tawana, filed for divorce. They'd been together since high school. Hampton sweethearts. She was there before the money, before the fame, before everything. They had 5 children together. The divorce filing cited irreconcilable differences, but court documents later revealed financial issues as a central factor. Allen couldn't maintain the child support and alimony payments the court mandated. The money simply wasn't there anymore. The same year, he was sued by a bank for over $300,000 in unpaid debts. The same year, reports surfaced that he'd fallen behind on rent for a home in Georgia. Allen Iverson, who once made $154 million in NBA salary alone, was now dodging bill collectors. Rock bottom wasn't a single moment. It was a slow, humiliating disintegration playing out in public while the world watched and judged. But here's what nobody knew yet. There was still one safety net, one decision made years earlier by people Allen probably never met, one clause in a contract that would save his life, and the irony of who saved him would be almost too bitter to accept. The hearing in Fulton County. Georgia wasn't supposed to be the moment everything changed. Allen Iverson sat in court, facing his creditors. The jeweler was owed $860,000. Other debts were piling up. His lawyers were arguing that he simply didn't have the money, that the man who earned $200 million was, for all practical purposes, broke. The judge reviewed the financial statements, looked at the debt, looked at Allen, and then said something that nobody in that courtroom expected. "You're not broke," Allen's lawyers tried to explain. The monthly expenses, the obligations, the lack of income, but the judge cut through it. "You have $32 million you can't touch. That's different than broke." The courtroom went silent, because nobody, not the creditors, not the media, not even many people in Allen's inner circle fully understood what the judge was referencing. The Reebok Trust. Back in 2001, when Allen Iverson signed that lifetime endorsement deal with Reebok, the headline was the $50 million over 10 years. That's what ESPN reported. That's what made the news. But buried in the contract was something that seemed almost insulting, at the time a trust fund. $32 million, set aside in an account that Allen Iverson could not touch, could not borrow against, could not access under any circumstances until he turned 55 years old in 2030. Reebok's lawyers had studied the statistics. They knew that professional athletes, especially athletes from poverty backgrounds, had an overwhelming tendency to go broke. The numbers were brutal: 60% of NBA players bankrupt within 5 years of retirement, 78% of NFL players in financial distress within 2 years. So Reebok built in protections, not just for Allen's benefit, though it would save his life, but for their own investment. They needed Allen Iverson's brand to remain valuable long-term. They couldn't afford for him to become another cautionary tale that damaged their association with him. The trust was untouchable by design. Creditors couldn't claim it. Lawsuits couldn't pierce it. Not even Allen himself could access it early, no matter how desperate the situation became. It was a legal fortress built specifically to protect Allen Iverson from the one person most likely to destroy his financial future, himself. And it worked. Here's the irony that cuts deepest. The only people who protected Allen Iverson from financial ruin weren't his mother, weren't his childhood friends from Hampton, weren't his financial advisors or managers or the people he paid to guide him. They were corporate lawyers from Reebok he probably never met. They did what no one else in his life would do. They told him no, and they made it legally binding. Not his friends, who kept accepting the monthly allowances even as the money ran out. Not his advisors, who took their fees and stayed quiet while the expenses spiraled. Not the family members who depended on him but never protected him. Corporate lawyers, the same corporate entities that Allen Iverson had spent his career resisting. The same corporate image he'd fought against with his cornrows and tattoos and refusal to conform. The same corporate structure that tried to sanitize him, control him, make him more palatable. Those corporations saved him. It's a bitter truth, the kind of irony that feels almost cruel. But it's what happened. The trust didn't make Allen's problems disappear overnight. He still owed the jeweler, still had debts, still faced the divorce proceedings and the custody battles and the humiliation of his financial collapse playing out in public. But it gave him something no one else could: a floor. A guarantee that no matter how bad things got in 2012, 2013, 2014, no matter how low he fell, there would be something waiting for him in 2030. $32 million doesn't solve everything, but it's the difference between temporary hardship and permanent destruction. It's the difference between broke now and broke forever. In the years following the court revelations, Allen Iverson started talking more openly about what happened in interviews. He acknowledged the mistakes, the inability to say no, the loyalty that became enabling. He defended the decision to support his people. "I don't regret helping the people who were there for me, but also showed understanding of where it went wrong." He got sober. The drinking that had helped him cope with the pressure, the grief, the weight of carrying so many people. He addressed it, made changes. He rebuilt relationships with his children, found peace with the divorce, even as it remained complicated. And he learned boundaries. The thing he couldn't learn when he had $200 million. He learned when he had nothing. How to say no. How to help without destroying himself. How to honor loyalty without letting it consume him. The people who disappeared when the money stopped, he understood what that meant. Who people were versus who he needed them to be. By all accounts, Allen Iverson today is at peace in ways he never was when he was rich. The trust fund sits there, still untouchable, still waiting. 2030 is approaching. He'll be 55 years old. And that $32 million, the decision made by lawyers he never met. The protection he didn't ask for but desperately needed will finally be his. Not because he earned it through perfect decisions, but because someone, somewhere, understood human nature well enough to save him from it. So, what's the dark reality of Allen Iverson's financial collapse? It's not that he was stupid. It's not that he gambled everything away in Atlantic City. It's not that he was lazy or entitled or any of the things the media spent years saying about him. Allen Iverson didn't fail because he didn't care about money. He failed because he cared too much about people. The same loyalty that made him a hero in Hampton, the same loyalty that brought a community together when he was sentenced at 17. When the world turned its back, and Hampton doubled down, the same loyalty that defined who he was as a person. That made him beloved by an entire generation. That loyalty had no off switch, no budget, no limit, and in a system designed to exploit that loyalty, it destroyed him. This pattern repeats constantly in professional sports. An athlete from poverty signs a multi-million-dollar contract, brings their family, their friends, their entire community with them, and the financial obligations multiply faster than anyone can track. Within years, sometimes months, the money is gone. The statistics haven't changed much since Allen's era. 60% of NBA players still face serious financial distress within 5 years of retirement. 78% of NFL players within 2 years. The NBA has improved. Mandatory financial literacy programs exist now. Rookie symposiums address money management. Teams employ financial advisors specifically for players. But the culture hasn't changed enough. Because the real problem isn't education, it's expectation. We tell athletes to remember where they came from. We celebrate the ones who stay loyal to their roots, who don't forget the people who supported them. We write heartwarming stories about players buying their mothers' houses, taking care of childhood friends, giving back to their communities. But then, when the money runs out, when the loyalty becomes unsustainable, when the math stops working, we call them stupid. We can't have it both ways. Allen Iverson is 49 years old now. That Reebok trust is still there, still untouchable, still waiting for 2030 when he turns 55. 6 more years. Then the $32 million becomes his. Not enough to undo everything that happened. Not enough to erase the humiliation of the collapse, the divorce, the public judgment, but enough to live on, enough to be okay. He's sober now, at peace with his past in ways that took years to reach. He still lives in Atlanta, still connected to his roots, but with boundaries now. The kind of boundaries that only come from learning the hardest way possible. He still loves Hampton, still maintains relationships with the people who actually stayed, still believes in loyalty, but loyalty that goes both ways now. And he's honest about what happened in interviews. He doesn't hide from it, doesn't make excuses, but also doesn't accept the simplistic narrative. "I helped the people who were there for me" exists alongside "I didn't know how to say no." Both things are true. This story matters, not as a cautionary tale about gambling, because that's not what happened, not as a morality play about excess, because that misses the point entirely, but as a mirror showing us what happens when America's contradictions collide. We worship wealth but provide no education for it. We celebrate loyalty but punish those who practice it without limits. We demand that people remember where they came from, then judge them when they can't afford to leave it behind. We create systems that exploit athletes from poverty, extract their talent, market their image, profit from their labor, and then walk away when the checks stop clearing. Allen Iverson remembered where he came from. Every day, every dollar, every person he supported. He kept his promise to Hampton, and it almost destroyed him. The only reason he survived was because a corporation he never fully trusted made a decision he didn't ask for, protecting him from the one force even the answer couldn't defeat his own loyalty. That's the dark reality, not stupidity, not recklessness, just love without limits in a world designed to exploit it.